Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, everyone. We opened this early because we had quite a few folks register. So we wanted to make sure that people could come in, but we'll get started at the top of the hour. So you have
Sounds
time.
great.
Just
Thank
an
you.
email.
Sounds good to me.
But welcome.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. For those coming in, we just opened early to let folks join. Please feel free to say hello to each other if you like. But we will begin at the top of the hour. Just had a lot of people register, so wanted to make sure we got lots of chances for people to come in.
Hey folks, don't mind me if I chew on a sandwich.
Please do. What kind of sandwich? What you got?
Turkey breast and reduced fat cheddar on whole wheat bread. Yummy.
Nice. That's good. I do get a hankering every now and then for a turkey sandwich. Good.
So Natasha, are y'all having a good response so far?
So far, we've had a lot of good conversations with interested institutions. It's wonderful to hear about all the great work that's going on and all the projects that people have underway and all the innovations and community building efforts that are going. So it's been a wonderful experience so far. But yes, looking forward to hearing about more of the great work. And good to see some of you that I've had conversations with. Welcome back. Lovely to see you. And those that I've not, welcome. Look forward to our conversation today. And if you want, while folks are coming in, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Go ahead and tell us your name and where you're joining from. We're going to give some time to let people come in and join us, but feel free to say hello. And if you're just joining, welcome. We're delighted to have you with us. We're going to give just a little more time to let people come in, but please feel free to introduce yourself as you enter. Tell us your name and where you're from. And we're happy to have you with us. I think looks like we're slowing down on people coming in. Thank you for all the introductions. So very glad to have you with us. I'm going to throw in a couple of housekeeping items in the chat for you here. But first of all, thank you so much for coming to this information session to hear about the work of this RFP and what we're doing. Just to let you know, this is being recorded. We will send out the recording after. You will also have access to the slides and any of the resources that we mentioned. So please, if you're like taking notes or trying to capture something, we will share all of that with you afterwards. And please do feel free to get into the chat and talk with each other, ask questions of us. We'll be keeping an eye on it as we go along. And we're excited you're here. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Courtney, who's going to tell you guys a little bit more.
Great. Well, thanks, everyone. And it's fun to see everyone's faces and names. And thanks for spending some time with us today. We're really excited about our Employer and Community College Partnership Challenge and Initiative, and just really in awe of all the amazing work that all of you do. And we know that this is a really busy time as you're all ramping up for the fall semester. So most of you, I think, have read through the RFP and are familiar with most of the information here. So we'll go pretty quickly through the information and then open up to Q&A so we can make the best use of time. But to just quickly, I wanted to make sure I introduce our team. So I'm Courtney McBeth. I'm our Senior Vice President and Chief Program Officer, and joined Strata about 2 years ago. Prior to that, was in public higher ed for 20 years and in various campus-based roles. And many of you know Natasha, my colleague, who is helping to run this initiative for us. And we also have Holly Custard on the line, who's been with Strata for several years and is working on the initiative as well. And Elaine is a great member of our team who's out on maternity leave, and then Melissa Levitt as well. So many of us have worked with community colleges and very much respect all the work that's done at community colleges. So for our agenda today, like I said, we'll quickly go over the RFP and the requirements, knowing that many of you are very familiar with those, and then we'll get into Q&A and next steps. And really, we want this to be resourceful for all of you so that as you're crafting your proposals that we can answer any questions that might be helpful for you or your teams. So I think most of you are likely a bit familiar with Strata, but we basically have, between our levers of and tools of research and philanthropy and impact investing and policy and advocacy, really our North Star is to bring to life a post-secondary education and training system that will ensure equitable pathways for all students, and really drawing those tighter connections between education and work, and ensuring economic mobility and equitable pathways for students. Our headquarters are in Indianapolis. We have an office in Washington, D.C., and then many of our team members actually live across the country and are all involved in post-secondary education and workforce in their respective communities. So a bit about Strata, and of course you can always go to our website to learn more. I think many of you know this is our first major initiative really focused at community colleges, and really recognizing the critical role that community colleges and their collaboration with employers play at this moment in our country in terms of ensuring that we get students skilled and trained and educated, and filling the workforce needs at this point as our country is recovering from COVID. And so, you know, our team especially is really excited to be able to work with all of you as you create your proposals. So next, as we think about just sort of high level, this is, as you know, is a $4 million initiative, which we're looking to give around a dozen or so grants to community colleges, and distributing those funds before the end of the year. We've had lots of one-on-one conversations and different meetings with you and your colleagues around really what we're hoping to do with this initiative is really just help to accelerate and catalyze the work that you're already doing, and not add weird parameters or additional work, but rather try and supplement and really help the work that is already happening on your campus, that's really focused on meeting the regional workforce needs in your region and your communities, but really thinking about boosting employment and earning outcomes for students. So thinking about not only those necessary supports and steps to help students persist and complete, but what are those post-graduation employment and earning outcomes that the programs produce. And again, probably the most critical thing today is to remember the deadline for proposals is August 15th at 11:59 p.m. in whatever your local time zone is. And again, Natasha is available and can meet one-on-one with anyone who has additional questions after this. Before we go into the RFP details, I wanted to just give real context around tips for setting the context. So having run some statewide RFPs and different innovation challenges in the past, what I've learned in previous roles and working with other national funders, and also being on the proposal side and writing a lot of grant applications, is I would encourage you to think about, as you're setting up the context for your proposal, just remember that we have, you know, a dozen or so folks who are going to be reviewing these proposals, and that none of us are the experts in your institution or your community or in your region like you are. And so as you craft your problem statement and how you're setting up your proposal, please provide all that framing for us and help us understand your region, your institution, the particular students and learners that you're serving. And we've tried to intentionally set up the proposal and the RFP to allow for that flexibility for you to craft the proposal and the solution that really fits your institution and your learners. And so a bit of advice is just assume that all of us on the review committee that are reviewing these proposals, that we don't know your institution. And so provide all of that context that will be helpful for us to really understand your institution and your learners, and why you're crafting your proposal and in the way that you are. That will really be helpful for us. And really the idea there is, you know, your campus best, and provide that rationale of why you've crafted your project in the way that you have. And really that's us recognizing that we're not the experts, you are the experts. And our job here is we really want to support you and elevate the work that you're doing. So with that, I will turn it over to Natasha to go over some of the RFP details, and then we'll shift over to Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Courtney. Incredibly beneficial to have that context framing, I think, in that setup that is mindful and runs alongside what we're trying to do in this RFP. And as Courtney said, if I have talked with you and we've done a one-on-one, fantastic. I'm happy to talk with you again. If you're new to this and I haven't had a chance to talk with you, if you have something that's very specific to what you're thinking about proposing, I'm happy to find a time to connect and talk about that further. But now we're just going to do an overview of the RFP and infuse into that some of the questions we've been getting as this has been going along, to do some clarifying points. And then, of course, we'll open it up for the rest of you to engage in. So right off the bat, this is a partnership challenge. And so one of the questions that we get in this employer and community college partnership is, what types of partnerships are we looking for? Or are we thinking like are the most beneficial for this challenge? And I would say at the bare minimum, you need a community college and an employer partner. Those are our starting ground rules. But what we're looking for are strong employer partnerships. What we want to understand through this and from the institutions that we get to work with in this grant opportunity are, what are the effective elements of a strong employer partnership with the community college? And so we're hoping to leverage this RFP to allow community college partners to ask more of their employers. One of the things that we'd heard as we were engaging in conversations and developing this was the employers stating, they aren't being asked enough of what they can provide to support. And so we're really looking for employers providing more skin in the game, whether that's financial support and providing basic needs support to students, whether it's providing faculty to teach, whether it's space on a floor, if it's providing equipment, if it's work-based learning, but we want employers involved. And so thinking about that strong employer partnership, help us understand what that looks like in your context, back to Courtney's great points on that local context piece. The other thing, though, is that we don't have a specific model that we're looking for. So while we know that we want strong employer involvement, the type of strong employer involvement is up to you. So if there are ways that you're working in your community, if there are things that you are doing, help us understand that and tell us based on the data how you're meeting those needs and why this partnership makes sense to get to those goals that you have. So again, this is just reinforcing that we believe that you know your community best. And so we don't want to say, if you aren't engaged in a particular type of partnership effort, to sort of force that issue, but in the ways that you are involving employers and where you can use this to leverage additional employer engagement and involvement, please feel free to do so. With that said, though, we are aware that for some of the success for this, you might be involving other partners in this space. You might have community-based organizations, maybe there's another higher ed, maybe there's workforce intermediaries, and that is fine to have them involved and participate. But our interest in sort of really understanding the scope is that employer partnership. But Courtney, anything you want to add to the partnership piece?
Sure. I would just add, Natasha, so in a previous role for about 15 years, I negotiated employer partnerships for a university. And right before, as we were developing this initiative, we did some qualitative interviews with employers across the country. And I was really struck by, given the acute workforce needs from employers, as we talked, this new role in Strata, as we talked to these several dozen employers, I was struck by the fact that they're saying, oftentimes our community college partners don't ask us for enough. Like, they can ask for a lot more because we are so desperate for talent right now that we're really willing to put a lot more skin in the game. So I would just put that challenge out there that part of the rationale and the reason why we crafted this RFP in the way we did is that we heard from employers that they want to be more engaged. They're willing to give more in terms of whether that's like helping with tuition assistance or paid internships or wanting to engage in curriculum development and various engagement. Given the moment in our country and just the real need for workforce and talent, they're willing to step in. And so we encourage all of you to perhaps try and be a little bit more aggressive, ask for more from your employer partners. because, you know, we want to test this hypothesis that they're willing to give more and do more to really support your institution and your learners. And so I've been on the end of kind of begging employers to take free interns and be engaged with the university. And this moment feels a bit different. And so we just really want to encourage you to try and stimulate new types of employer engagement and more in terms of these proposals. And that's really, we're wanting to see this as sort of a three-legged partnership here between, you know, our small bit of philanthropic support that can help catalyze deeper employer engagement with your institutions and the employers, either in your region or a national employer partner, however you're shaping that up.
No, thank you for that. And I would just add in that sort of context framing piece, we don't have particular ways in which we're defining what a region means for you or what a locale or your context is. So you have the freedom to tell us what that is or how you're defining it or how you're approaching it and looking at it in that regard. So if you're thinking, well, does this employer count if they're here? Yes, it does. So you can just connect the dots for us on how it connects. So in the RFP itself,
Natasha, sorry, really quickly, Margaret Purcell asked a question just pertaining to that point. So before we jump through, are you asking for match value to be illustrated in the budget? So yes, that is very helpful if in the budget you lay out where your expenses are and where the contributions are, and being explicit about how employers are contributing. So thanks for that question, Margaret.
Mm-hmm. The other way to think about that is there is a request for a letter of support from an employer where they can lay out what they're doing if it's not things that fit into your budget in that space of how they're participating involvement. But there's not a requirement that whatever budget you put in, the employer has a matching fund per se. So it's if that makes sense. So if you're putting in for the full 400,000 over the 2 years, there's not an expectation that an employer would have a 400,000 2-year match that you would need to illustrate in the budget. We just need to understand how the employer is participating, what that is. And if that helps us by putting it in the budget, great. If that shows us in the employer letter of partnership, how they're participating and what they're doing and what support they're providing, that's fine too. So in the RFP requirements, what we're looking for in the 5 pages, so you have 5 pages to answer the RFP pieces. You can add appendices, which I'll talk about in just a minute. The 5 pages, you do not have formatting requirements related to that. So if you're going, do I have to double space it? No. If you want to go to the very far margins, you have the freedom to do so. We are keeping it within 5 pages to answer the questions. And what we really want to see is that this was a data-driven initiative from the start, so that you have a challenge that you're addressing, and that challenge came out of a local or regional data need. Again, here we are looking to you to tell us what counts as your local or regional, what data you look to determine those challenges. There's not specific data that meets that requirement there, but we do want this to be data informed and data driven to say that this is meeting a need. We then want to understand what is the partnership and why do you think this partnership will address the challenge you've identified for us? So help us understand what this employer partnership is and how it meets that. We're looking here to also see an implementation plan. You can do this in a variety of ways. I've gotten questions of, can it be a visual? Yes. Can it be a timeline and things? Yes. All of this is fine. Whichever way helps us understand how are you going to actually implement the solution you're proposing to meet the challenge you've identified in the data part. We're also very interested in understanding the equity-focused target population. So in your context, who are the student populations that you're going to serve in this solution and why? And how are you thinking about this partnership as being student-centered, inclusive, and equitable, particularly for students who historically have faced the most barriers? So for this, help us again understand in your local context what that equity-focused population means for you. And it might be women in a particular field that are in career and technical education that do not see this as a career pathway for them. It might be rural population students that you're trying to pull into different situations. It might be students with IEPs that are coming from high school into a program that they have not seen as a career pathway before. The point is that we want to understand, back to Courtney, is on help us get the context how you're defining who your equity focused populations are in your region or your area, and then how you're thinking about how they'll be supported and recruited to participate in the solution. And to the question on what is considered regional, this goes back to you tell us what makes sense for you, whether that's your county area that you cover, whether it's a regional area in which you work. But if there are places where you are tracking what matters local to you and how you're defining that, let us know how that plays out and what data you're looking to for that. Courtney, anything you want to add for the sort of first 3 context setting pieces of the RFP?
Sure, maybe I'll answer Lisa's question around what's considered regional. So this may be, again, think we've got like smaller community colleges, we've got large ones and everything in between. So it may be your city, it may be your county, it may be statewide, or there may be sort of like a system-wide sort of state community college system. So again, we are very flexible in that. Just please explain why you've crafted your proposal in the way that you have. You may have a very targeted one, and you may be a smaller community college in a rural area who has an acute workforce need around X industry, healthcare industry, or you may be a community college system that is attempting to serve 3 industries across a statewide system. So we are willing and flexible and want to fund everything in, but just what meets your region most closely. And I'm not sure, Natasha, if we want to address some of these other questions, or if we want to hold on these till we, some of them are, maybe we can get through the RFP requirements and then we'll circle back to these other questions.
Yes, I think so. Because some of these might get answered as we go through, but then we can always come back around. And again, just to reiterate, if you have a very specific question about something that you're trying to do in your institution, you're like, does this count in this context with this data and that? I am happy to meet with you one-on-one to talk that through, but we can also get into it in some of our questions. So for part 1 of the RFP, help us understand what's your data-driven challenge, what's the solution you're proposing through this innovative partnership with employers, and who's going to be served through this partnership, and how are you thinking about recruiting and supporting and ensuring that they can actually be in this partnership and have success through that partnership is what we're looking for in those first 3 pieces. Then we want to understand who is your employer partner or partners, and how are they going to be that active partner? So this is where help us understand how are they participating, what are they putting in terms of that active partnership place. If they're financially involved, what's happening in that area? What are they doing to be a good partner to you and to the students and to the local regional area? We also want to know, beyond that employer partner, if you are going to engage with any other local or regional partners that you need to help ensure that this partnership will be a success. So if there's any other those that are going, let us know. We're trying to understand this landscape of partnership and what it entails. And we know that it's not always just a one-to-one, that sometimes there are varieties that are in there. But what we want to see in the RFP, out in addition to sort of your narrative explanation of that employer partnership, is an attached, this will be an appendix, it won't count as part of your 5 pages, but an attached letter that demonstrates support from that employer partner. There's not a particular format this needs to take. And so if you have a way that your employer partners write support letters, and that's an understanding with two of you, we're very happy to work with that. What we want though is a stated declaration of commitment from that employer partner, that they are like, yes, I've agreed to do these things, that I'm participating in this way, and I'm an active part in this partnership. So we can have that. And that is an appendix. How you put that together, if you want that as one PDF or your narrative and then a separate PDF of appendices, that's up to you. It's easier for me personally if you send it all as one, but if it's easier for you to send them separately, just keep them in the same email so I can keep you together as we do that, and we'll just combine them on our end. Other thoughts, Courtney, on the employer partner part of the RFP? All right, moving right along. So now that you've got the context piece, you're telling us about the employer partner. The last part of the RFP gets into the, well, what are we going to look at? So we want to understand what your plan is for measuring success. How are you going to look at progress, results, or impact of your specific solution? Within that, we are interested in a variety of outcome measures, but some of these may be more or less meaningful to your partnership efforts. If you're doing something with an employer partner and you will not have completers by the time the 2-year period is over, helping us understand how you're going to track enrollment, how you're going to be looking at retention, what the relationship is in terms of the projected socioeconomic outcomes. If the employer has said, like, we agree to hire X amount of students at this rate of pay, or what that is, so that we can understand that impact of partnership on meeting the student and employer needs, as well as understanding, is it successful? Are students moving through? Are we getting students in? But do not think that you will be held accountable for outcome measures that your project scope will not meet in the 2-year grant. So we want to understand what your plan is for measuring those progress outcomes. We'd also like a timeline to understand, how do you plan to do this through the 2 years? If this is easier, I got a question of, can we infuse this with our implementation plan? And if that works for you, yes, please do. If you need a separate attachment of how you've put things together in a visual for how timelines work that works for your institution, that is fine as well. What we want to understand now is the feasibility and the timing of the effort that you've planned over the course of the 2 years. And lastly, we're looking for a budget and accompanying narrative. And your budget and accompanying narrative are not counted as part of your 5 pages. That is an attachment, that's an appendix. And so if you're going, how do I fill all of this narrative in 5 pages? The budget is a separate part of that. I do want to spend some time talking about some of the budget questions that we get on that piece, but I just, for right now, know that it's a separate attachment and we want to see that there. Courtney, any other comments before I go into budgets on these ones? All right. So budget questions. We've got a lot of questions about the kinds of things that can fit in, or this money can be funded to. I will say it is a $400,000, up to $400,000 grant over a 2-year period. How you break that into your 2 years is dependent on the challenge, the solution, and what you're trying to do. So if you need to buy equipment costs more in year 1, and there are additional expenses that are in year 1, put that in the budget and help us understand how you need to break up the funding over the 2 years. You can use the funds for salaries, wages, benefits, anything related to personnel, related to the challenge or the solution that you've put forward. If you need to subcontract to any of the intermediaries or community-based organizations, or if there's any other related partnership expenses, maybe you need to bring people together and feed them to have a conversation with your employer partners or whatever that might be, that is an allowable expense. Travel expenses or convenings. If you need to get people away to have conversations on implementation and move them somewhere else to get this work to move forward, please feel free to do that. Any evaluations or research associated costs that might come with what you're trying to do, technology or software, any supplies or equipment, training and professional development expenses. That could include things like if you need to get some of your faculty to certain credentials or certification pieces that are built into that for sustaining your talent pool of teachers, that's fine. And also capital projects or constructions. What we are not funding here is anything that's direct support of students, whether that's through stipends, through scholarships, through direct aid, to pay for a student to do an internship, to pay for cost of transportation. That's really where we're hoping and encouraging our employer partners in this work to cover those types of direct expenses to students. If they're doing work-based learning, we want the employers to be paying for it, not having that covered in this space, or covering sort of tuition in that area. So anything that's project-related costs, pretty much a wide range of whatever you need, you've got flexibility there to do. The area that we are stepping away from and not engaging with is any direct support of funds to students. And lastly, we do have an indirect cost rate of 15%. Questions on budget or additional points on that, Courtney? All right.
I'm trying to answer some of the easy questions in the chat here to be efficient. So we got the tag team going here.
Nice, this is good. So let me show you what the budget and the RFP looks like. There's a little sample one in there that you can see. So breakdown of direct costs, give us the salaries by wages, how you're doing, and any fringe benefits, subcontracts, any other direct costs that are the different supplies, equipment, any of that stuff that we were talking about. And then indirect cost line, if that's something that you figure. That indirect cost is a recouped cost to your institution for the process of going through and putting all this material together. If you have a standard within your institution that you do not do indirect costs, then that's not a line that you would put into here. For us, it's that some institutions have a higher indirect cost recoup rate that they put in. Ours is 15%. But you can use that as a sample budget outline if you like.
And
Let me back
yes,
up.
POA funds can be used to cover tuition.
Yes. I'm now scrolling back through the questions. Courtney's on it. Good job, Courtney.
I think we've basically covered those.
All right.
Here.
Nice.
I think there was one question early on about considering partial awards.
Thank you, Holly. Partial awards in what way? Like, I want to make sure I understand the question.
So maybe whoever asked that question, you please unmute and you can ask, or you can type it in there, because I didn't quite understand exactly what you meant by partial award.
Sure. Hi, Kara Altman, Salt Lake Community College. I'm thrilled to be on today. So the question really comes from a private development background that I have. And sometimes we make a request, let's say it's for that $400,000 max. Are you all considering making those partial awards where you say this part of your budget looks really strong and we want to back that, but maybe this part isn't quite on dialed in. So we want to reserve those funds for another awardee. That's where the question's coming from.
Sure, thanks for the question, Carol. And I can see your campus from where I'm at, so I'll wave from my home office here. You know what, we have had instances of that in the past, and I'm not quite sure how that will play out with our selection committee. So I think our idea here is that we'll fund roughly a dozen proposals. We have 4 million allocated for this, and you know, I think the idea is to fund proposals as is, but we may have some flexibility there if we see that. So I think that's maybe a flexible enough answer that maybe I didn't answer your question, but I want to leave us a little bit of room of flexibility, because you never know how the selection committee will view all the proposals as they come in.
Of course. Thank you.
So Natasha, maybe we can click through the last of the slides and we can start working on some of these questions in the chat.
Sure. Yes, because there's some good questions coming up. So let me just go through the last of the information on this, and then we'll come back around to answer this. And the rest of the time is yours for all of these questions. And please do feel free, as we're doing, as we get into that, if we're like, say more about what you're asking, please feel free to unmute and help us clarify. I want to make sure you're getting your questions answered. So in terms of the timeline, you know that on Monday, August 15th at 11:15 p.m. in whatever your local time zone is, that is the proposal deadline to email to me your PDF of your 5-page narrative and any attachments that have come with that. We will then spend time reviewing that. If there are questions about what you have sent, I will be reaching out to you as any follow-up right in around that August 15th to the end of the month of August. So if there's something in there that I'm like, ooh, I think a page is missing, or what are you talking about here? I want to understand. We will reach back out to you through that process. That will not just be a forgotten proposal in there, to ensure that our reviewers have the best understanding of what you've put forward. We will then, our target for getting award notification letters out to folks are September 15th. So in about a month, you will hear about where that is. We're looking to then go through and the grant agreement process of getting contracts and all that in place by the end of October, so that we can get funds out in November and do a larger public announcement of who has been chosen and selected to be part of the challenge. The grant period then is a 2 years, so it'll go from November of this year through December of 2024. The project will wrap up in that December of 2024, where we'll have final reports due, and hopefully have some like, look at all the stuff we've learned and celebrate in this 2 years of working together as a group. I want to drill down on a couple of things within that sort of larger arc of the timeline to talk about what are specifically requested of folks within the grant requirements. So reporting requirements is sort of the first question that we get. So let me start in the middle and then I'll work my way to the ends. There are 2 reports that we will ask from you. One at the end of year 1, so around November of 2023, for a update on where you are in implementation, all of that, in a financial statement as well. So you'll have 1 report at the end of year 1, and then you'll have a final report and financial statement at the end of year 2. Those are the reporting requirements that will come along with this. In addition to those reporting requirements, we will have check-ins to see along the way if there are things that we can do to assist you in the work that you're unfolding and engaging in, if we know any partners that can step in to help, if there's resources that we can direct as you have questions. And so there will be individual check-in meetings where we're just like, how are things going? We understand that there's a lot of change happening in the world and things that we need to do, and especially in partnership spaces that can happen. And so you will see here different months on individual update meetings where you'll have some Strata team members not coming in to sort of check on where you are in with a check sheet for related to the grant, but to understand how we can be best supportive and helpful, and to inform if we have areas that we're seeing consistent need across our grantees to spend our time when we get together. So we'll work with each of those individually to schedule those times. And then lastly, we'll have a collection of institutions that are doing this work, and they're all engaged in employer partnership, and it would be such a missed opportunity if they didn't have a chance to learn from each other. So we will have larger grantee with your employer partners meetings. These will mostly be virtual. We were thinking about 1 in person because it's so much better sometimes to just get connected and hear from others and do that work in that way. But we'll have a virtual kickoff meeting in December where, we sort of say, thank you, let's get this going and what's happening in this grant. And then sort of biannual in a way, larger times where, as we're hearing things from the individual meetings, if we need group time to share together, if there are those that need to talk about things that are working on, if there's a shared professional development need or something in that space, we'll use those to really help elevate and leverage each other's knowledge and skills, but also advance the practice. So that's not only sort of the reporting requirements, but when will you be talking to us, and then also how you'll be engaging with the larger group as a collective. Questions about that or additional comments you might have, Courtney? All right, so to wrap it up, next steps. We do have an FAQ document that will update regularly. I will add new questions that we have from this or clarifying points to it, and we'll send that out. You also have the RFP. You will have all of these links. We'll send the copy of the slides and the recording after this. And just a final reminder, proposal deadline is August 15th at 11:59 in your time zone. If you have questions or need anything, please do feel free to email me. I am happy to meet with you and talk about anything further or answer questions you have. But for now, we'll go ahead and answer questions that you have. So I'll stop sharing so we can see everyone and get into answering some of these great questions. So thank you so much.
Sure, thanks, Natasha. I'll jump in here since you've been talking and I've processed and answered a few. Strata will pay for those in-person convenings, so don't worry about putting that in your budget. Sarah had a question around, is it okay if our 2 employer partners are actually competitors in their aligned industry? That's fantastic. I think whatever works best for your institution, and maybe even helpful to get 2 competitors to work together on something aligned, and so that is definitely, that works. Jessica Morton, should we budget for that person? Okay, we answered that. Natasha, there's a few questions around using budget for tuition, and so perhaps you can answer that question. I know you've gotten it a lot in one-on-one and info sessions in terms of
Yes.
money.
Yeah, so that's a place that we're really looking for your employer partner to provide the support. So that's part of that direct cost to students that we're not interested in funding. I would say if there's something about subsidizing the cost of a program in terms of thinking about what are the faculty or the training needs or things related to that, that would be fine. or an academic coach. You could have them, or a guidance that's related to that side, or a career connector that gets out into the community, engaged with that. All of those things are fine to provide supports and work with students. But anything that's that direct support in aid or stipends or tuition to students is not an area that we're interested in funding.
And the thinking and the rationale there is that we'd like to fund things to sort of launch or scale out the program, and think about that in a sustainable way long term. Audrey De Leon had a question around letters of support. So yes, if you have a community partner like a local workforce intermediary that you're working with that's critical to your project, then yes, please include those letters of support from not only your employer partners, but if there are these key community partners that are part of the proposal, then yes, that's very helpful for us to understand those critical, not only employer, but other community partners that are that you're partnering with to deliver on the project. And then Jessica Morton asks about if we want to see a good faith estimate of the numbers of students served. Yes, we definitely are interested in understanding that and how you came at that estimation.
There was a question that came early on. Could this be used to support high school completion program with opportunity for earn and learn with partnering employers that then lead to additional certification and education?
So yes, and I think that was maybe Julie's question. So yes, if there is a college on-ramp or sort of high school to community college pathway program with an earn to learn component and an employer involved with an industry certificate there, then yes, that definitely would qualify. And Holly, did we miss any other questions?
Two folks have asked about cost per participant. Does the cost per participant ratio matter?
No, because I think it depends on what you're putting in that this is funding in this support. And so in some instances that would make sense, but in others, not as much. So no, I don't think so. Courtney, do you have a different?
No, I think that's right. And really this goes back to us really wanting to put the creativity and the ownership in your hands to help us understand what makes the most sense for your students and community. I will say, I think that question gets at scale. And, you know, I think if there were a proposal that serves 10 students versus hundreds, we would likely sort of lean towards a program, a project or proposal that serves more students. So hopefully that's helpful in some way.
Mm-hmm. Other questions?
So there's a question here, which Natasha, I haven't been asked this directly. Maybe you have in some of the other meetings, how industry associations count, if industry associations count as the employer partner.
Who asked that question? Would you mind saying a bit more about what the industry association?
Susanna.
Sorry to put you on the.
Oh, actually,
I didn't ask the question. I saw it early on in the conversation, so I'm not sure who asked it.
Thank you.
So as you can see, I don't think we've thought through this exact question. I think if the association is, if they're going to put skin in the game and really engage and ensure that tight connection to employers, then I could see, you know, that making sense. I think just whoever asked that question really build the rationale and help us understand that.
Yeah, that was my default. It would depend on what that is, but oh, sorry, please, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say hi, everyone. This is Eric Lugo with City Colleges of Chicago, and I think I highlighted this in my question. generally speaking, there's, a handful of industry associations or organizations like Association for Supply Chain Management, for example, that partner very closely with a significant number of local TDL companies, and can be a facilitator to many of those companies in thinking about developing partnerships. And I guess my general question was, if we have a strong partnership like that, could we work through that partner to think about a scalable solution in supply chain versus having to specifically identify one employer as part of this submission?
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you
Eric.
for that clarification. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Courtney.
No, you're seeing us do our color commentary. That's a great example, Eric. And yes.
Yeah.
And really like that thinking of thinking about a scaled proposal and way to get it scaled through an association. Let's see, Stella Perez, you have your hand raised.
Oh, and I am following up on Eric's comment and the question. I raised the same question, and that is that we have a number of partnerships with industry associations. One is National Association in Telecommunications, and they have over 100 telecom industry partners across the country, and we actually serve the learning needs for the association. And so looking at them as a potential partner for a proposal like this, and we would be serving a large scale number of students, workers, and workforce development. And they, the question is, would they qualify as then in fact our employer partner?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Stella.
Okay, a nods. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
And Chris, I see you have your hand raised. Chris Johnson, let's see, maybe you can unmute.
Oh, he's unmuted, but we can't hear you. I'm sorry, Chris.
Perhaps you can type in the question.
There was a question earlier on that says the need my organization is addressing is the current lack of workforce talent in Michigan. Do we need to detail in our need statement how Michigan came to have such a depleted workforce? That would take a lot of writing space. So I suppose this is getting also at the detailed kind of labor market insights.
Yes, and I think many books have and will be continue to be written on Michigan and the economy there. So what I would say is provide a very brief description in the proposal, and then feel free to reference in the appendix if there's additional reading material that you would send the selection committee to look at. But I would say just try and get a very executive summary version of that to frame it out, and then reference in the appendix.
Another question is how quickly folks can expect to get the presentation afterwards?
This week. So I would say tomorrow, but it will likely be Thursday, but for sure this week.
And what about budgeting for marketing purposes?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine.
So Natasha, maybe you can give examples of, as we've talked to different institutions, of different types of things they might use the funding for, if we're saying, we're not leaning away from providing, all the grant money just for tuition and direct student support. What are other examples of things that institutions are thinking of using their budget for?
Sure. So some have been thinking about additional supports that are needed in the classroom. So like technology, there are some that are doing VR, purchasing all the VR equipment they need to engage with students and getting things. Some of it is about supporting career counselors to ensure that they're getting the recruitment of students in and moving this in and doing connections with K-12 or community organizations, or going back out and finding adults that need to come into these programs. And so supporting those positions. Some of it is ensuring that they can recruit and retain additional faculty, because they can't find the faculty that they need to teach the programs that they have, because those faculty are working in industry. And so finding ways that they can incentivize getting the faculty in and thinking differently about what those faculty positions might be, so that they can keep them over time instead of trying to find them as they need them for certain certifications and pieces like that. Some are supporting student success centers that are focused on like tutoring and connection pieces like that for students to ensure the sort of academic supports are in place depending on what they're looking for. And that some are helping provide students that have gone through a program as mentors to those, so they can see career trajectory paths for equity focused populations. Equipment is definitely one. Space and rebuilding or working on doing something differently with the space that they have has been another. And so, and a lot of professional development needs on how do we really meet the needs of our students today and make sure that our faculty are prepared to be able to do that and work meaningfully with the employer partner, whether that's through creating like a mentoring program that the employers have to go through so the employers are good mentors and prepared for doing that work or not. And some are working to build up registered apprenticeship spaces. And so quite a few. I think about what your wish list needs are around the internal support piece, and those are I think some of the ones that come to top of mind, but quite a range. It's a wide range.
And to Mantha, to your question, I think around outreach and marketing and perhaps like food for training and meetings, that's fine if that's built into, you know, a piece of the rationale of how to have a successful project.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle asked if we can subcontract with employers to offer internships or externships.
Yes. So I think the hope is that the employers are really part of the work-based learning, whether it's earn to learn or paid internships or apprenticeships, that they're deeply engaged in part of that partnership.
Emily asked early on a question about the narrative, looking for more description in terms of the implementation plan. Are you looking for an overview there and then have the details in the timeline later in the narrative? Just a little more structure on implementation?
Yeah, so I'd say that that's a good way to think about it, or think about it as embedding the implementation plan and the timeline together. I think is where people have been more comfortable, but it's a part to help us understand that what you're proposing in your challenge and the solution to meeting that challenge is doable, that it's a feasible thing, that you have a plan on how to actually implement it, that it's not going to like, it's a hope and a prayer and we'll see what happens. But so if the meat of that is really in the timeline for you and how you're thinking about it, then please feel free to direct us there as in the implementation plan, you know, in an overview and additional details on how that will play out or found in the timeline. That's completely fine.
And a question from Jessica, should we budget for the in-person meeting in April?
No. Anytime that we will get you together, and whether you're like, we need to get together again, that was something that Strata will support. So you do not need to add that into your budget.
And Monica asked, are employers expected to pay 100% of the salaries for student interns? I would say negotiate whatever you can get. The hope is that, you know, the more skin they have in the game, then, you know, the more they'll be engaged and really value those students. But if you have to figure out some sort of match or partial pay, you know, we leave that up to you. You know your employers and what you can negotiate with them.
Mm-hmm.
We'll give a second pause here, which always feels like an eternity on Zoom, but any other questions in the chat, or if folks want to raise their hand?
I saw one on about endnotes in the appendix, and that's fine. If there are ways that you're also used to putting information together, again, there's not format requirements. So if it's endnotes versus footnotes or something, that's just fine.
let's see, Tiziana raised her hand. So if you want to unmute.
Soon as I found the unmute button. Questions regarding incumbent workers and ways to promote their advancement within the employers that we provide the training, they will get the advancement. Can we consider part of the numbers of students that we're planning to reach as in one way as a retention tool for the employer, and for us as a way of promoting from within and validating that the training is useful to advance your career or to be placed at a different level?
So I'll say the way that I've been answering the question on things like that is related to thinking about stackability. And while a lot of times in stackability, we talk about getting the first one and then we're like, and then stack. If it's thinking about how are we adding an additional layer that builds on in those skills and knowledge, and that additional piece has value, and we're helping our students understand how to actually navigate that stacking, that makes a ton of sense to me, because we need examples of how to do that and engage with employers, particularly in industries where employers come in and take our students before they've completed particular programs, because they get that knowledge and skill and they're like, oh, I can take them now and work in these positions, but we want to get you to here, and that additional piece has value and in that area. So I think helping frame it and helping us understand that connection stacking piece would help. But Courtney, I don't know if you have additional thoughts or other. Okay.
So it looks like there's a few questions just wanting clarification on the salary for student interns. So the idea with our strata funds is the intention to help sort of deepen and catalyze and scale what you're doing. And so, which is part of the rationale of not wanting, all the money to just go to fund tuition directly. But when it looks like the question here is around intern salaries, and sort of, this question is really hard to answer actually, because negotiating internships and the pay for internships is very specific per employer and institution and how you have your program set up. But I think, as we said earlier, our propensity is to just say use this RFP as a way to really push your employer engagement as far as you can go for them to contribute to the student success, and setting up models that will be able to sustain over time.
The other way to think about this is, can you offset other costs that you have about running these partnerships that would open up funds that you can use internally to do a part of a negotiated match, or something that you've had with student interns, or thinking differently about how you're leveraging in internal dollars in that way, was one of the conversations that I had. Yes, we would like your partners. One of the things that we really want to understand from this employer partnership piece is that the more actively involved an employer partner is, particularly financially, in providing these supports when they have students that come in to do this work, the more impactful that partnership can be. And so it is really our desire to understand, when you have those employers that are those very active partners financially, the impact of that on students and the partnership. So we do want the employers, and we want you to try to use this, make the ask, like, those are asking me to do this. Can you leverage this RFP to have that conversation differently with an employer partner? And if not, come back and tell us how the conversation went. That would be good to hear too.
Julie has her hand raised, so please go ahead and unmute and ask your question, Julie.
Hi, Courtney. Just clarifying with the time frame for the budget and budget narrative. Is it November 1, 2022, or the end of November to the end of December 2024?
So we've given, because the grant agreements is not a precise science going back with your institution. So generally we're saying, the grant would go from the end of 2022 to the end of 2024. So yeah, just generally in that time frame, if you can set the budget for that.
All right, 2 minutes left. Want to be mindful of folks' times. Great questions. Really appreciate all of the interest in the questions and seeking clarification points. It's very helpful. Anything else?
Well, thanks everyone for the great questions. I think we want to leave everyone hopefully with a sense of enthusiasm and empowerment for you to really craft the proposal in the way that makes sense for your students and your institution. And we're on a few of these parameters. We're have our point of view, but we certainly welcome any chance to talk about any further questions that you have. And mostly just deeply grateful for the amazing work that you do. And we are here to help and support and do everything we can to help you serve the students that you're serving, and just really grateful for all of you.
Yes, likewise. Thank you so much. Good to see you. And for those again that we talked to, and those are new, lovely to meet you. And I look forward to answering additional questions as they come up. We'll get this information back out to you in an email, so you have it all at your fingertips this week. But thank you again. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.